Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. I hope you're doing well. You may know that I love self-published fantasy, and today it's time for me to revisit my top 10 favourite self-published fantasy books. So this was a really difficult list for me to put together. I would have had no problem whatsoever compiling a top 20 of my favourite self-published fantasy books, but then I'd have to order them, and to be honest, that was a large part of the problem that I had. There are a number of great books, therefore, that I have left out of this top 10. I'm not going to go through any honourable mentions because I could do that and sit here for quite a long time listing off all of these great books. I'm going to dive straight into the top 10, and I'm going to start off with The Blood of the Spear by Mark Timoney. This is book one of The Eye of Eternity, and I just had such a great time reading this. It kind of feels a bit like almost a Wheel of Time light, and I'm not saying that in any negative way whatsoever. In fact, many people will see that, as I do, as a positive. It's got that kind of expansive world building and some of those same kind of story elements in it as well, but everything in this book is condensed into a little bit shy of 600 pages. In many fantasy books and series, to get the amount of action, the amount of story that we have in these 600 pages, you'd be looking at 2, 3, 4 books to cover the same amount of ground. And it doesn't feel rushed for it either. Everything just goes by at a nice, even pace, and you get plenty of time to explore the world and to get to know the characters as well. I thought it was really, really well done. I am still, anytime I think about it, pretty much amazed at how much Mark Timoney managed to fit within these pages without it feeling like it was too much. So The Blood of the Spear is a great jumping off point into my top 10. Next up, I've got a book 2 in a series. Actually, you will find that a few times as we go through this list. They are not all the first book in a series. This one is A Dual Sin by Daniel T. Jackson. It's book 2 of the Illborn saga. I really liked Illborn, and this one, as it appears in my list, is a better book as far as I'm concerned. The action in here is just ramped up, and the intensity pretty much from the first page is just really high and doesn't let up for the entirety of the book, and this one is a pretty chunky one. I loved how you had the same characters from the first book, but there was kind of a side character who gets a lot more page time, if you like, in here. And I thought that he was really well developed and really well integrated into the story. Without spoiling anything, the point of view that he kind of joins and almost adds a secondary point of view to, I thought was really enhanced for having him there. I just thought it was a great idea, and it's a great character, to be honest, to have in there. Really allows us to see a bit more of the history and to understand what's going on, bearing in mind that our main characters are trying to kind of piece this all together for themselves. So to have someone who does know a bit more about what's going on really made this one a much better story in my eyes. I loved the action that you had in here. I loved the character interactions, and I'm really excited to continue with this series. In 8th position in my list, I have Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering. I really enjoyed the world building in this story. It's another nice chunky one, plenty to get your teeth into, and the world that you've got here is not only really expansive but really well detailed. I love exploring the little pieces of it, and Palmer Pickering is the sort of author who really does delve deep into it, really allows you that time to look at what's around the characters as they're going through this world. Sometimes that level of detail can seem a little bit too much, but that doesn't detract from the book at all. It just makes for a really interesting and well-rounded experience. I really enjoyed the magic that you've got in here. It's quite interesting and quite unique and really well put together. I loved the different elements that you've got of it and how they were used and how the characters learnt about it as they went along, trying new things and making their own advantages from it. I thought it was really well put together in that respect. The character work in here is very good as well, and to be honest with you, the only thing that I would say is a real detractor from this book is the absence of a second book. There may be one in the future, who knows, but for the moment Heliotrope does stand on its own. In 7th place in my list, I've got another second book in the series. This is No Safe Haven, book 2 of Malitu by James Lloyd Doolin. No Heart for a Thief is book 1 in this series, and it's another great book as well. Again, one of the things that really stands out to me in here is the magic. I thought it was very inventive. I love the kind of spirit stealing that you've got in here and the different elements to it, the different types of magic that you can have through different almost spirit stones, I guess. But I really enjoyed the character work that you got in here as a development from what we had in the first book. The end of the first book really put me in a place that I was excited to continue the series with, and this one definitely did not disappoint. There's a bit more action in here because we're kind of able to dive straight into it. We don't need quite as much build up, and I like that. But we still have the dual storylines as we're in the present day, but also featuring storytelling essentially as we go back and learn about our main character and how we ended up where we are in the present day, instead of having it just as exposition. I thought it was very well handled, although maybe in the first book it took me a little while to get used to that aspect of it. Overall, it's a really great series and another one where I can't wait to get my hands on the next instalment. In sixth place, I've got a couple of books coming up actually, which I wasn't really sure of going into, and they really surprised me, and I love them for that. The first of them is Sea of Souls by N.C. Scrimgeour. This one is a Scottish folklore inspired fantasy. You've got Selkies, you've got Kelpies, you've got Wraiths, and I love reading about them. It was just a very interesting world that I don't normally tend to read about, which is why it was a bit of a surprise for me. I love the way that the Selkies are introduced into this story and how they're integrated into the world and how they combine and interact with the characters in the story. The storyline itself I thought was very good, very engrossing, and I really loved the revelations that you got in here, which really did come out of the blue. I wasn't really prepared for them. I guess I wasn't really thinking about them, trying to work them out. So when they hit with impact, and I really appreciated that. I'd love to see more from this world, and if you haven't checked it out, it's quite a thin one, so it's a really nice easy one to fit in comparison to some of the other chunkers on this list. Next up, and we're into the top 5, I've got However Many Must Die by Phil Williams. This one, just from the cover, if you know me, you may be surprised that I would pick it up, let alone that I would like it, and like it as much as I did. But it's one of those books that's really stayed with me. I just can't stop thinking about this book whenever I'm on the topic of my favourite fantasies. So for me, there's no surprise that it's in this list, or even that it's so high up in this list. It was just such a shock, I suppose, for me, that it was so good, considering what it is and what my tastes are. As you can tell perhaps from that front cover, it's kind of a 1940s inspired world in terms of the technology level and the warfare that's going on, to be honest. And we find ourselves behind enemy lines with the Blood Scouts of the series name, and this is an all-female band of scouts made up of light infantry, heavy artillery, a couple of magicians as well, and I really like how they interact and the banter that they have there. I just thought it was very natural and made these characters so lovable. There are a few different types of magic in here, including one which we see really on the other side of the conflict, and I thought they were so interesting, the way that we see so much more of them as the story progresses, and the different limitations that they have, but also the different abilities that these magicians have, the different things that they can do with these separate branches of magic. I really love the overall storyline in here. It was just so thrilling to me. I found it very difficult to put down, and I'd love to read more from this series. In fourth position, it's one of the best audiobooks I've listened to in a long time. This is Along the Razor's Edge, Book 1 of The War Eternal by Rob J. Hayes. And the audio for this one, what made it for me is the narration, because the narrator, I think, is just a perfect embodiment of our main character. It's a first person story, and you get so much of the character through the narration. That also obviously comes from the writing, because it is just done so well, and there is so much heart in this main character. The magic in here is again one that's really interesting. There are so many different elements of it, and it was really interesting learning about all of them, and again the limitations that you have here, as you've got people who are using, or to be honest with you, not using the magic and having withdrawal symptoms perhaps, because a lot of this book is set underground. We are very limited in the world building in terms of what we see of the physical aspect of it, because we are in essentially a prison camp for much of this story, and our characters are trying to escape from it. And I love how that set this up for the next, what turned out to be 4 books in this particular series. The character work is absolutely fantastic and is some of the best I've seen, especially in a first-person story. This is one which is a completed series. As I say, there are 5 in total, and it's a great recommendation. Another completed series next, in third in my list, and it's one that I don't actually have as yet a physical copy of. Despite the fact that I've got book 1 and book 3, I've chosen book 2 of Threadlight by Zach Argyle, which is Stones of Light. Although Bonds of Chaos, the third book, is the highest scoring book for me in this series based on my weighted ratings that I use when I'm reviewing my books, it's Stones of Light that has the kind of a personal aspect for me, because I just loved the development, the continuation of the story, but the development of the characters and where they went on, the journey, both physical and I guess mental, that they went through. I just thought it was an excellent story with some excellent characters, again some fantastic magic which is really interesting to see in use. And I loved learning about the development of the magic, not only in terms of how it is used, but where the magic comes from. It's an aspect that I don't think is really explored as much in fantasy. It's more about learning to use it. With this one we see so much more of that, and I thought it was really well handled. The character work in here is absolutely fantastic. There's a great family aspect in here as well as a great found family aspect, the two of which combine very nicely as we go through the story. And I love how close you get to the characters as well, so you feel some real emotion as you follow with what they're going through. Again, Threadlight is a finished series. All 3 books of a trilogy are available now, and it's absolutely one of my favourite fantasy series, let alone just one of my favourite self-published fantasies. In second place in my list, I've gone for The Iron Crown by L.L. McRae. I love both books that are out so far in this series, but this one I think just takes the crown, so to speak, for me, because it was so unexpected. Going into this, you don't really know what you're going to get until you've started reading it, and it pretty much blew me away because I just loved the world building in here. I love the dragons that you've got, I love the characters, I love the magical aspects of it. Everything just worked so well. It's like it was a book or maybe a series that was written specifically for me. It resonated with me that well. And I love that you've also got in here a prequel novella which really helps set the scene in terms of characters, world and magic. It just worked very, very well. That one is The Citrian Key, and you can read it either before or after The Iron Crown. Again, the aspects of family and found family are strong in this one, and that develops really well as you go through both this book and book 2 in the series as well, which is The Shadow Gate. Overall, this is definitely going to be one of my favourite fantasy series when it's finished. I'm really looking forward to the next book in the series, and I'm sure L.L. McRae is going to nail the landing and wrap up the series with a bang. So as with the first iteration of this list, number 1, my favourite self-published fantasy book, is number 2 in a series. This is Of Darkness and Light, book 2 of The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Kyle. I loved book 1 in this series of Blood and Fire, but this one was just such an improvement. It was better in every single sense. It was just on a completely different level. And that's not to say that there were any real issues with the first book. It's just the quality of the writing, the story, the character development, the world building. Everything was just so much better in this book. There's a phenomenal story as you're going through The Bound and the Broken, and there are so many pages already to this series because he's just churning out the books at a great rate, but they are very well put together as well. They are not rushed in the slightest. Everything works really well in here. I love the expansiveness of the world building that you've got within this series, and because it's quite a thick book as well, you do get to see a lot of it in there. The characters I think are very well put together in terms of the cast. You've got a good variation. Everyone works really well. I don't think there are really any characters that I don't like in terms of the character work that you've got there. There are characters who are bad, who you are not supposed to like, perhaps, but even with some of the, what you might call the bad characters, they are so good you almost find yourself rooting for them because they become favourites in their own right. I love the inventiveness that you've got in here. I love the action that you've got in here as well. We pretty much kick off right in the thick of things, and for a lot of the book that intensity doesn't really die down. The pacing in it is very good. You do have your little lulls that you need to catch your breath, but then it ramps right back up again, and I thought it was just really well done throughout the entirety of the book. I'm loving this series. I can't wait for the next one. I think there's 5 main books, but every time there's a main book you then have a novella, so you can dive back into the world without having to wait too long. So The Bound and the Broken is one of my favourite fantasy series, but in terms of just the self-published books, Of Darkness and Light takes the top spot for me. So there we go. I feel very relieved now to get that all on film because I can't take it away now. I spent so much time chopping and changing various parts of this list, trying to order them, thinking I've got my 10 and then thinking of another book that I really wanted to include instead of something that was on there. It was such a difficult time, but I've got a fantastic top 10. I could have had, as I said at the start of the video, a top 20 relatively easily as well, because there are so many fantastic self-published fantasy books out there. Let me know in the comments down below what your favourites are, and if there's any that I've not read, I'll definitely be checking them out. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this list. I look forward to seeing you in the next video sometime soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.